Hello, this is Mike Van Meter. Welcome to the Recovery is Possible podcast. Thanks again for joining me. You can reach us at our Facebook site, which is also called Recovery is Possible, and our website, which is vanmeterwellnesssolutions.com. So the reason we're doing this podcast is to educate the public about addiction, remove the stigma associated with addiction, and offer help and support to those suffering from addiction. So one of the issues that comes up in addiction is suicide. I can tell you in the years that I've been in recovery and around recovery circles and doing employee assistance work, suicide is nearly always discussed as a part of addiction issues. In fact, I'm kind of scratching my head right now trying to think of a case I've worked with where that was not an issue that was thought about by the client that I was working with. So addiction is a real issue, and as is suicide. And the two are related in many cases. Now, the last time that we discussed addiction on this podcast, I had a guest on, and that's Mark Pfetzer, and we also had Jared Slendy, and they talked about a row that they were going to do. And by row, I mean in a boat across the Atlantic to raise awareness about suicide. And we talked about the actual event itself, which is the physical row across the Atlantic. And we talked about that and how they're going to be doing that in 2022. So they have about a year before that expedition is going to take place. But tonight, I want to explore more why this is an issue for Mark and Jared and how they got to this place and why they took on this cause. So I have on the phone here, I have Mark Pfetzer. Welcome, Mark.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for having me again.
Oh, great. Well, listen, thanks for joining us last time. Really appreciate you talking about the row across the Atlantic. And that's just a phenomenal feat that's hopefully going to get you a lot of attention. And when I say you, I mean get the cause attention, because that's why you guys are doing it. And we don't want to forget that. And so, Mark, if you would just kind of talk to us about why this cause, why suicide, and what brought you here.
Sure, Mike. And you bring up a great point that it truly the cause is the purpose here. So just to reiterate, I belong to an organization called Guardian Initiatives. It's a nonprofit here in New Mexico where I work and live at. Myself and Jared Slendy, who's a coworker of mine and friend, and also my main partner here in Guardian Initiatives. We started Guardian as a nonprofit, as a way to do things to bring awareness and assistance to kind of broad people or organizations or not necessarily organizations, but people or groups that have been negatively affected by tragic events. And we thought, for our first initiative, why don't we do something that we are that involves really what we do, which is law enforcement. Both of us are law enforcement officers. I think Jared's about 12 years on. I've got about going on 19 years total on. And so first responder, we say law enforcement, but really we decided to do it for all first responders. So fire, police, EMS, and dispatchers as well. The mental wellness and suicide prevention, and said, we're going to raise money and awareness for this. And, you really kind of need something for the shock and awe factor. And so kind of along the same time, we're talking about rowing across the Atlantic Ocean in a race called the Talisker Whiskey Atlantic Challenge, and rowing not to win the race. And, we're not crazy athletes. We're just really normal guys. But hey, what a better way to try to raise awareness for this than doing something that kind of shocks people's, grabs their attention and shocks their conscience there. Let's row across a boat, across the ocean, 3,000 miles from the west coast of Africa to the Caribbean, and be fully self-supported. So kind of all came together at the same time. As far as the reason or kind of our connection to the first responder wellness and suicide prevention, I'll tell you this, I'm going to explain I already did kind of explain how it started, but it's really strengthened for us and grown on us. And we've realized so much more as we go on. Every day we learn more, we get more involved in this, conversations you and I have had, or readings we've done, talking to other people, hearing how deep it goes. And we see, like, man, we couldn't have been more spot on with a cause than what we did for this. I kind of mentioned in the previous podcast, but for anyone who hadn't heard that one, I'm third generation law enforcement. My grandfather was a police officer. My dad was a police officer. Now, I grew up with my dad. He was a police officer long before I was born. And my dad suffered wellness issues from the job, mental wellness issues from the job, which, of course, the mental wellness issues all will later relate into physical wellness issues oftentimes. And he suffered from that from the job. Now, my sister and I have one sister. She's a little bit older than me. And, this is how we knew my dad, though. We knew him to be on edge a lot of the times. We knew him to be, have periods of depression, but that's just how we knew him. And we didn't know anything about, well, this is all related to his job. But he knew it. And I think my mom knew it. And, he took a medical retirement eventually. I mean, you're talking about a man who slept about 1 hour a day, all job related. Couldn't get off a night shift.
He slept an hour a day?
Yeah, about an hour a day is all he got towards the later years.
Yeah.
And he got better. He sought, help from professionals and got better. He had, depression. And from what I remember as a kid, them telling us, my parents telling us, like his depression levels were off the charts or the scales that they use. He had, kind of obsessive compulsive disorder from certain things and anxiety. And we knew that. I mean, there was times when I saw my dad he'd be telling me a story about his dad growing up and he'd start breaking down crying. Or, other times when you'd spill a glass of water, which took nothing more than to clean it up, and he'd go off the handle on you. Well, he got well from all that. And after getting well, one, he was a totally different person. And, but then he told us as a family, that there were times when he contemplated suicide. He considered suicide. He needed a way to end it. And he had a plan. He knew what he was going to do. He would call out in a fake pursuit and run into a tree or telephone pole and so that way it didn't look like suicide. And, I realized all this. I keep going back, let me back up. I keep going back to saying, this is how we knew my dad. And this was our norm for at least my sister and I thought about more of this after we even got into the cause. I mean, this wasn't a driving force behind us determining this cause. Our thought into, figuring, well, this is the cause we're going to do was, we knew this was a problem. We knew there was talk about it. We knew there was people within our own agency that have suffered. But I realized this after, and it made me just think of how frequent wellness issues are, suicidal thoughts are, that to me and my sister, that was growing up around a dad who suffered from wellness issues. We didn't think anything of it at the time other than be careful what you do around dad. So like I said, I mean, the cause has grown on us, not just from personal experiences, but also, both of us are administrators at our agency and, seeing things at other agencies, hearing things around the state, and just being more aware of the problem now, you start to see more issues again, not just at our agency, but at other agencies and places around the country as well. So it's the row is our opportunity to catch people's attention. And then like Jared always says, when we're talking about rowing across an ocean, we're going to be talking about mental wellness.
Yeah.
As well. And that's the whole point of this.
So your interest in the cause of suicide awareness, would you say that came from your family experience with your dad, or were there things that happened professionally at work that caused you to say, hey, I need to pay attention to this?
I think neither really. I mean, our thought about it, our decision to get into it was more, like I said, just knowing that we had enough knowledge to know this is a problem. I mean, we weren't living in a hole. We had enough knowledge to know, there's a nationwide problem on here, that there were organizations that tracked statistics on officer suicides. Nothing at our agency. I hadn't experienced anything at my own agency, any triggering event that made me think we need to do something about this. But it was just knowing that it was a problem, and knowing it was a problem that's not addressed a lot. We're gonna spend our time and efforts to raise money and awareness and training for a problem. Let's do a problem that's not necessarily in the mainstream. And we could be bringing in extra tactical training, but there's already plenty of that. So let's do the wellness. This is a huge thing, and this does come after after my time at the National Academy and hearing about it as well from people that I was in, talking to other law enforcement professionals and hearing their stories of it. So again, we knew it was a problem, but it was no triggering factor. But it has all those, we've seen all those things, not triggers, but just things that support. Yes, we're going down the right path here with what we're trying to do.
Yeah. So, and what you have learned in talking about the issue itself of suicide, kind of let's start with sort of the 30,000 foot look at what are your thoughts on that? What leads to this? Let's just start with that. What do you think leads an individual down that path? Now, I'll qualify this with that. You and I, Mark, are not doctors. We aren't psychiatrists or psychologists, but we are people that have been in law enforcement for a long time, and we have seen this both not in our agencies, but with people that you've had to deal with as a law enforcement officer. You come across this quite a bit, and I've developed my own thoughts and opinions on this. But let me ask you first: what is kind of the big 30,000 foot opinion that you have on this issue?
I as a first responder, you face stresses that are unique to the job, and knowing ability to cope with those stresses. And a lot of jobs have stresses, don't get me wrong, and I know in talking to a physician here recently about it, that physicians are also high on a suicide rate, which is, again, just awful. But so I know other jobs, so I'm not taking away from other professions, but first responders see things, hear things, deal with people at awful times. And so if we're just taking that kind of 30,000 foot view, having the ability to deal with that, those stressors of the job, add on top of that, the stressors of everyday life that all of us experience, whether you're a first responder or not. You may be a teacher, you may be a truck driver, you may be a construction worker. There's stressors of life, as we know, whether those are just physical health stresses, family stresses, financial stresses, relationship stresses, children stresses. There's all those different stressors that we're all affected by. So take all those normal day-to-day stressors, add on top of that the stressors specific to the job, and seeing, I think part of those stressors associated with the job, I definitely want to add this, you see the worst in people. You don't just see a product of the worst in people. You do see that. You do see people beat up. You see domestic violence victims. You see homicide victims. You see drunk driving crashes. You don't see, but you also, you're diving into that drama of, and I don't say that in a negative way, but that drama of, that's when people call us, right? When they're struggling, when they're having a problem, when there's an issue that they can't resolve, some crisis in their life. So you're going to that high escalation. So, okay, I'm sorry. If you take all those stressors, now take a personality, and I'm going to speak specifically to law enforcement here because it's the area I know the most. Take a personality of, I'm the person you call when you need help. I don't need help. You call me for help.
That's right.
And I'm here to fix it. And it's that, it's that kind of traditional type A personality of being a law enforcement officer. So do we have the ability? We do have the ability, but can we force ourselves to stop and say, hey, now I need help? And we kind of, I think, oftentimes look at ourselves as not superior but tougher in a way. In that, again, I'm the person you call for help. I'm not the one that needs help. You need help, and I'm going to fix your problems. So I think having, take all the stresses, now take a personality that is not necessarily programmed to stop and even recognize I'm my glass is filling up and I need to empty it, or even willing to stop and say, I need help. And there's a lot of reasons for that outside, I think, the personality, that type A personality that, I think some of it has to do with cultures within agencies. I think a lot of it has to do with that. How are my coworkers going to react? How's my family going to react? Am I going to lose my job if I say I'm having this? Where do I get help? Can I afford help? There's a lot of things that I think end up having wellness issues go untreated, leading into this area that for some tragically ends in suicide.
Yeah. And, it's funny that you mentioned that, because I often talk about recovery from addiction as being for the same reasons. So in recovery, I will say that the toughest group of people to work with, recovery-wise, are police officers. To a certain extent, military, but definitely police officers. And I think a lot of what you are talking about has the same application for suicide. Step one of Alcoholics Anonymous is I am powerless over alcohol, and my life has become unmanageable. Now we can change that to I am powerless over, now fill in the blank, and my life has become unmanageable, right? I'm powerless over a situation. I'm powerless over my job or my divorce or my terrible boss, whatever. Fill that blank in. And then the second part of that is my life has become unmanageable. But like you mentioned, we are in a profession where you are trained to be all powerful. If we're in a fight, you and I are in a fight, I'm going home. You're not. I'm not going to be defeated by any means. Am I going to be defeated? Now, is that a great trait to have in a cop? Absolutely. Where I was a police officer in Washington, D.C., and much of the time I patrolled by myself, I had to carry myself. I had to demonstrate that I was it. Okay. I was fearless on the street. I had to, if there was a situation, if I stopped a car with 6, gangbangers in the car, you had to know that I was going to control that situation. That's an admirable quality. If you're an infantryman, if you're a pilot, if you're a surgeon, those are great things to have. Mm-hmm. But the problem is when you get to this point in your career or in your life where your life has gone down that dark tunnel, that is the time when you've got to realize that is not only not a good trait and not a good quality, but it's very dangerous. And I know in my own recovery journey, when I finally surrendered, right, and that was not a word that it was even in my vocabulary, when I surrendered to the darkness that was my life, that was my addiction, only then, coupled with I was open and willing to listen to people that could help me, and that's the second part of that, was I able to get better. And the same is true in the subject of suicide, is that I think people get down this road where, like you mentioned, it's this dark tunnel that they go down, and they don't see a light at the end of that tunnel. And they don't, even if they want to get help, they don't get help because, what is my boss going to think? What are my coworkers going to think? Because a police department or a sheriff's office or the FBI, wherever you come from, it's a small circle, right? It's a small community, and words get around, and your reputation in that community is everything to you, in law enforcement. And unfortunately, people become more concerned about what others are going to think of them than doing what they need to do to get well. And that's because of the stigma associated with it. And I will tell you that when I got past that in my own world, in my own life, my life got a lot better. And in time, I didn't really care what people thought of me. It was just, in fact, as most people in my life already knew I had a problem, and they were very happy for me when I finally got the help that I needed, because I became a much better person and a much better employee. But maybe address that a little bit further, Mark, the stigma. So you're convinced that that's a big reason why people don't reach out to get help, right? Along with ability, insurance, and money, and those are other issues too. But let's be honest. A lot of it is the stigma in the law enforcement community that keeps people from getting help. Wouldn't you think?
I would totally agree. And I think, part of that goes down kind of what we've just been discussing. Part of that also includes a personal stigma, and as you're talking, I'm just sitting here thinking about how many calls, how many times have I been dispatched to a call to a suicidal person? A lot. If somebody calls dispatch, or if the suicide hotline contacts 911 dispatch because of somebody with suicidal threats, law enforcement's going to go. Where now this brings up a whole nother topic on, we may not even be the right ones to go, but tend to, who else in these situations are going to go. So we end up going. And so that personal stigma, or for the same respect, calls of people dealing, mental health issues, not all, but when people get into that crisis associated with it. So now all of a sudden, personally, to think, am I willing to admit that I'm struggling in the same way that I handle this problem for people on the street? So there's that personal stigma of I don't want to, same way I don't think most cops, would want to be considered a criminal, because we work so hard putting, criminals in jail, finding criminals and putting them in jail, or, getting restitution to victims. We don't want to say that I may at some point in my life be in that same need for somebody else to intervene because of the crisis. So I think, one, you have the personal stigma. Two, I think, yes, a stigma within agencies. And I believe this is a stigma that we are the tide is changing right now. I think the more we talk, just, you and I's discussion today about this, and every conversation that goes on amongst administrators or, law enforcement agencies, individual officers or deputies or medics or dispatchers about the problem, the more it can be discussed. I think if somebody's having an issue, the more willing they're going to be to come forward, because it's not a discussion we're having right now of, Mike, if anybody in my agency says, that they're having wellness issues or suicidal, then I'm sorry, I can't trust them with a gun and a badge anymore.
Right.
That's not what we're saying at all. And so that's what individuals need to understand within the profession. It's not career ending. Having these issues is not necessarily career ending. Now, not dealing with them and having something bigger come about of them, having a domestic situation, or, doing something from addiction, not getting help with that addiction, or, of course, suicide, that is career ending. And there's no coming back from that. So I think stigmas within agencies, and in the years past, again, this job being a very, like I mentioned before, a very type A personality job, kind of one of those things of, hey, this is what you signed up for. You signed up to be a cop. If you don't want to see, gore or deal with people who have been, abused, or deal with death, well, this is probably not the job for you. It's what you signed up for. And then that same thing, when you start dealing with issues and you start having wellness problems, I think that same mentality existed within agencies when people are like, well, it's a job you signed up for, toughen up, get over it. And maybe, I don't know, like you said at the beginning, I'm not a professional on this. I know years back when my dad was getting into law enforcement, even to this day, but, there's a lot of veterans getting into law enforcement, kind of that same structured type job, if you will. And maybe some of that stemmed from there, or it was just natural within the profession. I'm not sure. But so I do think there's a stigma, both personally and within agencies. But I do, like I said, I do believe we're seeing that change now.
Yeah, and you raised a good point, and it's something that I often talk about. And again, on the alcohol side, which is my main focus, my main world, I've often said that alcoholics that are in recovery are not a security threat. I come from the FBI world, so we all have security clearances, and that's what people in my world are usually concerned with is, oh, they're going to take my security clearance away, and therefore I can't do the job. So I always said, somebody who's in recovery from alcoholism is not a security threat, but somebody that is an alcoholic that is not in treatment or not in recovery absolutely is a security threat. And I can tell you from personal experience that being in recovery with a mental health issue or an addiction issue is not a problem as long as it is being addressed. And now the problem with that is getting people to believe it. People say, I hear you, Mike, I hear you, but you don't know my agency. Well, I can tell you, I can't think of any cases where people were addressing the issue and were successful in addressing the issue and continue to have problems. But like you just said, Mark, it's when you don't address that issue, then it spirals into behaviors on your part where then you get involved in a domestic, or you hurt someone, or maybe even hurt yourself, and your agency shows up. Then you start having issues that are kind of hard to walk back and get out of. So I think the key takeaway there is, and let me know if you agree with me or not, is getting help early. The earlier the better, and the fewer problems you're going to have when it comes to your career. That's you really, the sooner the better. You got to get this addressed early on. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely, Mike. And even, I mean, to take that one step further, yes, if you detect something is wrong, or a family member detects something wrong, or a partner detects something's wrong, the earlier the better. Correct. But even more so than that, I think where we need to start, and where some agencies are and have done very good, we need to start being proactive about it. Mm-hmm. Let's not be early at treating. And I'm going to give a very, very generic example here, but let's not get better at treating lung cancer early. Let's do more of a risk management technique and try to avoid getting lung cancer. Let's be proactive in preventative measures. And I think there are things as first responders, certain things to understand, certain things to know, certain things to be practicing that can help keep us from getting to those positions at all. But then again, like you say, on the recognition, as soon as something is recognized, yes, the sooner the better. Because I've said this in my presentations as we go around presenting about wellness for our row, and that is, your glass is going to fill up. As a first responder, your glass is going to fill up. It may be a trickle effect, of small things over time. It may be a full open faucet from a major incident, but it's going to fill up. And if you don't empty it when and where you want to, under, in a controlled environment, it's going to overflow at some time that we don't know when that will be. And more often than not, it's not at the right time. And that goes right to that prevention, and taking care of things right away.
Yeah, and taking care of yourself too. And I think that one of the things that you have as a first responder, but it's not limited to being a first responder. I think there's a lot of professions that have what I'm about to say happen to them. And that is that, law enforcement and being a first responder in particular, but you could say that being a surgeon, being, really any other profession that you've devoted your life to, it becomes your identity. Like I noted, that's the one thing I have always noticed about law enforcement, the time that I've been in the law enforcement and in the military is, I wasn't just a police officer. I wasn't just an FBI agent. I mean, it was who I was. It wasn't what I was. In other words, it wasn't just that it was my job, but it was what it defined me. And that's why so many people, when they retire as a first responder, have a hard time adapting to not being a first responder. And by the way, I'm saying that from experience. I'm about a year and a half removed from retiring from the FBI. And I'd be lying to you if I didn't feel like a part of who I was is gone. I didn't realize until after I retired, how much I realized that's who I was. Now, having said that, once you become that, it becomes everything about you. It's your focus. It's your life. And then you stop doing things that you used to do. And in my world, we call it the used tos. I used to work out. I used to go shooting. I used to go fishing. I used to play the guitar or the piano or do acting, dancing lessons with my wife. I used to do that, all these things. They used us. And then our whole world becomes our profession. And then you find that the profession can be very toxic. It can be very damaging to you psychologically, emotionally, physically, and it starts taking that toll, but on you. And I don't know anybody that's been in law enforcement for any length of time that hasn't experienced that. It is a very, very toxic profession on you personally. But then what you've done is you've taken away all those things that you used to do, that you used to enjoy, that had, and let me be clear about this, things that had nothing to do with your job. It was like another world that you had. It was another outlet, and you stopped doing that. And then your world becomes this one thing in your world. I mean, truth be told, how many of you out there listening to us right now, and particularly if you're in law enforcement, find that you only hang around other law enforcement people? How many of you, when you're out with your spouse, partner, significant other, or family, how many of you talk about work when you're not at work? You could be at dinner. Now, how many of you have had your partner look at you and say, I really get tired of you talking about work? Like, Mark, has that happened to you? Is there truth in what I'm saying?
Yeah, very much so. Very much so.
Is that healthy? Is that mentally healthy for you?
Yeah, no. And it's funny because I've recognized it over the years. And when I talk to our new recruits, we just had a group of new recruits about to enter the police academy come through the office. We get to spend some time with them before they go off to the academy. And one thing I talk to them about is balance. And you talk about bringing the job home. It's a profession you cannot turn off. And so you're going to do things. But I tell guys, like, listen, your wife sitting in the passenger seat doesn't care that the vehicle in front of you has an expired registration. You've got to be able to turn things off. And you're never going to completely. There's always going to be, we're always going to have those habits, those officer safety habits that are going to bleed into our personal lives, or a level of awareness, which we should have. Especially I live in a small town. I've run into people, off duty with my family, and people that I've had to, dealt with, arrest, or had bad dealings with in the past. And so we've got to, the job just makes it to where we have to be like that. But one of the things I found, Mike, in my own personal life, again, that same thing, I started off as a baby cop and my world revolved around it. And of course, this is something, I have a picture of me as a little kid, probably 6 or 7 years old in a police uniform that looked just like my dad's, because it's all I ever wanted to do. I used to go on ride-alongs with him when I was a little kid. And so little, I had to sit on his briefcase to see over the dashboard of the car, and I'd ride around with him for a few hours, and then my mom would come pick me up. So this is everything I always wanted to do. So I became a brand new cop, and my world revolved around it. Now, I'd already been a shooter in competitive shooting prior to getting into law enforcement, but that continued, and wanting to train on different things, and going to the SWAT trainings when I could go to the SWAT trainings, and watching or reading books about, I read investigation books in my off time. And then something changed. I started going to school. I made the decision in my mind, I want to go to school. And it was all right around the same time I realized, I need a break. I need a break from some of this. And because the same thing, I would hang out with other cops off duty. And what would happen when I hung off with other cops off duty? We talk about work. And we're talking about bad guys. And, we always say,
while you're fishing, if you're still fishing, right? If you're still doing that.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's what happened. We would go. One of my friends that I worked with for many years here, he and I would go out fishing. We're lucky enough to have some famous world-class fishing here where we live, and we would go out fishing and be talking about work. And finally, I told him one day, I said, "We've got to stop talking about work. I don't care what we talk about. Let's not talk about work, because and this is something else I tell my recruits, that a very small percentage of the population creates most of our work." And that's unfortunately, we begin to view society as that small percentage. And that's compounded even worse when we hang out with our buddies off duty who are also cops, and we continue to talk about this small percentage, about, this guy doing, catching this guy doing that, or catching this guy doing this. And again, we never break out of that circle then. And then we can't see when we're around other sick people, if you will. And I say sick loosely, but, other people with maybe the same struggles, we can't necessarily identify our struggles because they look normal. I mentioned going to school. It was when I started going to school and I started to be around other people that were outside law enforcement. I could have other conversations with, and that was like an aha moment to me. And from that day on, that was back in '08. From that day on, I have, made it a point to go out and do things with other people who aren't cops. They're teachers, they're mechanics, they're, any other profession. And, you're of course going to talk about your job, but you can also get out of talking about the job and talk about other things. And you begin to see, which again, I think this is a huge part of the wellness. You begin to see that there's other people in society that are good people that we never deal with.
That's right. That's right.
And that's a huge part. And it goes back to that balance in our lives that I think we need. That's one aspect of that balance, that kind of social balance that I stress to our recruits. You've got to do stuff. You've got to keep your hobbies. You've got to do things that keep you grounded.
And, Mark, and this all goes back to the mental health and wellness that can help an individual not go into that dark spot that may take them to the point to where they think ending their life is a good thing. Because, if you've listened to previous podcasts that we've done here, you know that I started going down that dark tunnel in my profession as well. And one of the best things I ever did, I talked about becoming a spin instructor. Now, it could be anything, but that just happened to be, I happened to get into wellness, a physical wellness and diet and exercise and thing. That became that thing that used to, right? That was something that I was really into growing up and in high school, and then lost that in my career at some point. And I started, I got spin instructor certified, started doing that, got into cycling, got into triathlon, and that became my thing. And now the reason why I mention that, because again, you can apply it to any hobby that you're into. It doesn't have to be diet and exercise. It could be something else. But what happened was that while I was working as an FBI agent, I had another parallel part of my life where I started setting goals. I did ultra marathons. I've actually done 50-mile runs before. I've done 30-mile runs before. I've done, triathlons. And what would happen is I would set a goal of, hey, I want to do this marathon, or I want to do that ultra marathon, or I want to do that triathlon over there. And then outside of my job, so my daily existence would be being an FBI agent and doing the casework and doing all the things and experiencing the stressors that you and I have been talking about, Mark. But then I would also have in the back of my mind, hey, but today I've got to do, this far of a run, or I got to do, go cycling, do a cycling class, or swim, or whatever type of training. And it was fine. It was nice because I had goals in my life. I had things on my schedule that did not involve being an FBI agent and the stressors that go along with that. And I had things that I was working towards. And hey, the benefit was it was helping me stay not only in physical condition, but more importantly, mentally. It was very mentally healthy for me to have that alone time, that quiet time. And I was associating people because I would be involved in groups, that triathlon groups and running groups with the people that you're talking about that were not law enforcement officers, and they all had different professions. And I would have conversations with them about training, or about them, or about, what's going on in the world. But what we weren't doing, what we were not doing, what I was not doing was talking about my job. And it gave me another life outside of work. And I think that that's very healthy mentally to do, for any of us to do.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I think it's critical if we want to get through a job, through a first responder job, healthy. The reality is more people start the profession and never make it to the other end.
Yeah.
Most of them don't make it to the other end, not because of suicide or line of duty deaths, but never make it to the other end because something happens within the job. They realize this is not for me. And I can't help but think that a lot of that thought of this is not for me, this is not working for my family, is because of mental stresses and wellness, and that they're able to get out. If somebody gets in the job and realizes this isn't for me, I can't handle this stress, I don't, would never hold that against anybody. The job is not for everybody. So I think if we want to get through a career healthy, if we want to make it to the end and enjoy the benefits of, oftentimes the retirements that come with it, but just get through satisfied and happy, you've got to have that balance and those, parts of your life, a good part of your life that is outside of the job.
Yeah, you have to, because when you get to people that are getting to the point where they think ending it all is the answer in this job, it's because they've lost. I mean, let's face it. It's just you've lost hope. You've lost direction. You've lost any sense of future and worth of your life. And I think that one of the problems, and this is just my philosophy, is again, it goes down to we think that this is our life, the job. Well, the fact is, I was not born. I did not come into this world as an FBI agent. And I'm not going to leave this world as an FBI agent. In fact, I'm already not an FBI agent anymore because I retired. So the question is, what do you do when it's all over with? And if your answer to that is, I'm only this one thing, then that's going to be very, very dangerous. And you have to have something outside of you that you can point to and know that this other purpose, there's another purpose in your life. Now, for me, that was realizing that God had a plan for me. God had a plan for me in my life. And I'm not preaching. I'm not, don't think I'm about to drop religion on you, because I'm not. Everybody walks their own walk. Everybody makes their own decisions. I'm just telling you from my perspective what it means. And maybe really the overarching lesson here, as far as I'm concerned, is it just has to be, you need to have, there has to be a purpose to your life. And I think that what I've experienced with those that have committed suicide in my world, the circle that I'm aware of, those individuals just lost that hope. It was almost like they couldn't see a future in their life, and that direction was gone. And that good orderly direction of their life that's outside of them, and that purpose. And I think that's the tough part, is getting people to get that direction back and understanding the larger purpose to their being here on this earth. You have any thoughts on that, Mark?
No, I would agree. I mean, if we get too focused in on the job, if that's our life, we don't have that perspective outside. We don't have that perspective of a lot of things. One of the things is, like you mentioned about struggling to step out of that role. In reality, I mean, as soon as we step out of our roles, while I haven't experienced it yet at my agency because I haven't retired yet, I've seen it happen. The wheel keeps turning without us. That machine's going to continue moving forward, and that's not to say we don't, we shouldn't go to work and work hard and do our best every day to make the organization better, make the community safer, but the truth is, as soon as we step out, things are going to keep going. It's not going to fall apart. And I would have that fear myself, like, oh my gosh, how's whoever takes my position going to understand all these different things that I do to keep things going?
How is this going to function without me?
Correct. It's going to be all right. So that's one perspective to realize. Another perspective, I think, that stepping out also helps. A lot of people, we deal with good people at work. Don't get me wrong. Unfortunately, good people have crises in their life, whether it's something as simple as a fender bender, or more tragic as a fatal accident, or they were a victim of something. Good people, need law enforcement assistance at times. But like I said, a small percentage of that population, of the population, creates the majority of our work. I mean, the whole repeat offender thing, we're constantly dealing with people, the same people. So understanding too, and this is where stepping out and having friends and associates outside of law enforcement, you also realize not just that there's good people out there, but there is an unprovoked appreciation for what we do as well from most people. The news doesn't report on this, the majority of the time. You hear about dislike of law enforcement. You're not going to see on national TV, in my opinion, you're not going to see an event about, supporting first responders, a march to support first responders. But if it's a anti-police movement, that's going to be splashed all over. So it gives an opportunity to see that there is that kind of unprovoked appreciation for what we do. And you know what? Sometimes you realize too, that it's not necessarily from the people you think it would be from. And what do I mean by that? I also was a runner for a lot of years and really loved to run. And I became good friends with a guy around here. We met at kind of funny, we met at a running group, but we'd already, no pun intended, ran into each other in like two separate races. And we ended up, we're just about the same pace. So every time we ran, we were together, whether that was in a race or somewhere else. And, I became pretty good friends with this gentleman. And then later on, he told me, hey, just I'm a felon. And, he told me the story why, and I had to think about it. This is the first time now as a cop, here I am. I'm going to have that, we talk about that stigma. I'm going to have this idea of, I don't hang out with felons. It was a situation from a long time ago and an unfortunate accident and that, he was at fault for. But it made me realize, you know what? They're not bad people. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that, we would associate with any criminal out there. I think there's a difference in an active criminal and somebody who's made a mistake and paid their time and repented of their errors. And again, you just realize you start this kind of humanity side of getting out, dealing with people. People aren't necessarily bad. Even people who've made mistakes in the past aren't necessarily, they're not bad people. But it takes stepping out of that circle where we deal with it to see that. And that helps. Having that perspective keeps you, we talk about the preventative medicine to keep you from staying well, to keep you from getting in that dark place where all of a sudden this road leading down to suicide. That's, I believe, one part of it that helps keep us grounded.
Yeah, and you raise a good point, particularly this year. This has been a very difficult year for law enforcement with all the riots and the bad press and this was an election year, so a lot of politics involved, involving law enforcement. And I know that the officers and agents that I've worked with over the years, much of it is, I'm unhappy at work. The profession's not what I thought it was going to be. That happened particularly in the FBI quite a bit. A lot of people get into the profession and you think it's going to be all, high speed, low drag, sexy stuff. And a lot of it's not. It's, this is not what I thought it was going to be. The people aren't what I thought it was going to be. I don't like my boss. I don't like what I'm working on. And, on and on and on. The list of detractors is endless. But then you couple that with the public and how people start believing, well, the public hates us. And so not only am I unhappy at work, but then I'm being beaten up constantly. Every time I turn on the news, we're being beaten up. But you raise a really good point. The fact is that that's very misleading. The vast majority of people out there, in my experience, appreciate law enforcement, appreciate what you're doing. And you were spot on in saying the majority of people in America are law-abiding, respectful, support the police, and they're good people. And the problem is that that's not who you're dealing with. That's not who you're dealing with. And the fact is, the press talks about all the bad issues, all the bad things. They take that one or two people in the profession that have done bad things and then make it look like everybody in the profession are doing bad things, which is absolutely not true. But the problem is, if you're in that dark, depressed state, all this feeds into your psyche and you go to that dark place. And I think it's important to step back and understand that, you are appreciated. You are appreciated as a person. Not everyone is bad. You are not bad. And stop watching the news. Stop watching all these reports about how, what a bad person you are. You know what you are, and you know how valuable you are to your agency, your community, to your family, on and on and on. And that's what it comes down to is look at your self-worth. Look at how worthy you are to the community. And again, never forget your purpose on planet Earth. Because, ultimately, Mark, and I'll ask you this. If I was to ask you, what is your purpose for being here, what would it be?
Mine would be a spiritual. Mine's going to go down to glorifying God and helping do whatever I can to glorify Him and pass that along to others as well.
That's right. And I think that's what drives you on a daily basis, correct?
It is. It drives me and has helped me over the years through experiences I've had in my profession and outside my profession. It's what's kept me grounded. It's what's helped me cope with situations that may be difficult to cope if you didn't, if I hadn't had that understanding of God and His plan. In His supremacy, if you will, it would be hard to deal with. So yes, that is what guides me and what has helped me over the years.
So if for anybody listening to us right now that may be having those thoughts of just ending it all right now, what would be your departing thought to them? What would you say to that person right now?
There is hope, and I know that's probably overused, but there is hope, and also that you're thinking these thoughts, you're not in the correct mindset to make that decision, because something is unwell, and it's okay to be unwell. We can get better. So there's hope. There's hope if you ask me, there's hope through God, and you need to pray. And get on your knees and pray hard and talk to your family and talk to a pastor, even if you don't know one, call one up. But that you need to stop and think that, if I'm having these thoughts, something is not right, because those aren't thoughts you would normally have if you were well. And so you need to reevaluate once you get help and get better. And I guarantee that then those won't be your thoughts. But praying to God and putting your faith in Him would be where I would start first of all.
Yeah, well said. And that just give it time, get the help, things will get better, and just be around there for another day, and look at those around you, and not don't create more pain where there already is pain. Don't create more pain. But talk to somebody and reach out and get help. And if you are in the first responder profession and you're thinking that getting help is a sign of weakness, I will tell you that the exact opposite is true. It is actually a sign of strength, absolute strength, to reach out and get help from others. So, Mark, with that, wrap up with this and tell us a little bit more about your organization and where can the listeners reach out to you, find out more information about what you guys are going to be doing.
Sure. So again, our organization is Guardian Initiatives, and we're a nonprofit based out of New Mexico. And right now, our whole goal, everything we're doing, is leading up to raising awareness and funding and support for first responder wellness and suicide prevention. Our big awareness, we're going at this with a 3-pronged approach. First is awareness campaign, getting out, talking about this, just like we mentioned earlier, talking about the problem, so people realize, hey, there's people talking about it. Maybe I can approach this person, maybe I can approach that person, or this isn't such a taboo subject after all, or making the general public, making families aware that this exists within, of course, every profession and every person, but there's some special things within the first responder community. So awareness, and part of our big awareness campaign is this row across the ocean. It's 3,000 miles unsupported. 4 of us will get into a boat in December 2022 and cross the Atlantic Ocean. We mentioned it on the last episode, Mike, kind of some of the similarities there of, and not to liken it to struggling with a wellness issue or depression or suicide or addiction, anything like that. But, this kind of likeness of every day just waking up, and what do you see? You see the same horizon. And it doesn't look good, right? There's just empty, bare ocean. Maybe the waves are rough that day. Maybe it's flat, dead calm, no wind helping you. But every day, the same thing. We're going to be out there on the water for probably 35 to 40 days, somewhere in that area. And every day for 35 to 40 days, waking up and seeing nothing but through teamwork. It's going to take teamwork to get through this. It's going to take resilience. It's going to take personal resilience. It's going to take working with each other, keeping each other motivated, helping each other. We will get through to the other end. And one of those days we're going to wake up and we're going to see land. And it's not overnight, obviously.
Yeah.
It's going to take a while. So that our awareness campaign of rowing across the ocean, Again, that'll be December 2022. Our two other, it's a three-prong approach. We're doing training, so bringing in training for individual first responders and their families. And right now, we're working in our Four Corners area. The Four Corners being, the New Mexico, Colorado, Arizona, Utah. That I'm up in the northwest corner of New Mexico, bringing in training to individual first responders and their families, how to get through a profession mentally well, how to keep that mental, physical, financial, spiritual balance in our lives to get through well, what to look for, signs of unwellness, right? What's normal, what's not. So training for that, training for agencies on how to develop that culture, how to break through that stigma, how to have a culture, how do administrators handle situations, how do other officers, what do they do, what do they say if they see something, if they're worried about offending somebody, but what do they do? So there's training that needs to happen there. And then training for clinicians. This is an area we've already been able to attack here locally. And that is training for clinicians on how to treat first responders.
Oh, wow.
That is, because of the unique personalities, especially with law enforcement, think about it, anyone in law enforcement is going to understand what I'm talking about, the skepticism you're going to have of, do I really want to open up my story to you? I'm skeptical of you. And what we found is treated improperly, handled improperly, can have the reverse effects and cause that first responder, that police officer, to not want to go back to treatment at all. And so it's got to be done right. So there's a lot of cultural aspects of the job to train. We were able to train about 150 clinicians from around our area and throughout the state of New Mexico. We were able to do some training with a local group, public safety psychology group, on those cultural aspects of first responders. And then the last leg that we're working on, is on our, not working on, but is in our plan, is to have funding available for treatment when needed. Oftentimes, people have insurance. We get that, but sometimes maybe the insurance isn't going to cover who would be the right person for them to see. Maybe insurance isn't going to cover if they need to go to a specialized retreat. There are specialized retreats out there that deal with first responder wellness that are pretty expensive. So we want to have funding available for that. Or if it's one of our volunteers, we have a whole force of volunteer deputies. Reserve deputies. Our whole fire department here in San Juan County is basically volunteer, 200 and something volunteers. They may not have the insurance that covers what they need for something they experience from the job. And so eventually we want to get to the point where Guardian is able to help fund for select treatment when needed, because we don't feel that not having funding, there's no reason to not get treatment, especially, you're doing a job to serve a community, to serve your people. We need to help them. So that's our three-pronged approach: awareness, training, treatment. The shock and awe part in there being the rowing. That's how we get to talk to people. So that's Guardian Initiatives. Our website is guardianinitiatives.org. And I apologize. We learned later on we shouldn't have picked such a tricky name to spell, but guardianinitiatives.org. And that's where you can reach us. You can see some more about what we're doing. If anyone inclined to help donate to the cause and help us make all this a reality and further it, we have a spot there to donate. We're a 501c3, so any company wanting to get involved as a sponsor there's contact information on there. They can contact us. We have sponsorship packages available for the row. So lots of cool things. And again, our contact information is out there, and we're always willing to talk to people.
Are you on Instagram and Facebook as well?
We are on Facebook as Guardian Initiatives, and also Instagram. And so Facebook and Instagram as well. You can kind of follow us as we go on this journey with everybody. And so that's the main gist of our organization and what we plan to do.
Well, Mark, thank you so much for coming back on here and talking to us about that. And again, reach out to guardianinitiatives.org, the website. They're on Facebook. They are on Instagram. Find out what they're all about. Donate if you feel so inclined, and support this cause. December of 2022, and it's going to be fantastic. Please forward this podcast to anybody that you think may benefit from it, any organizations or individual people, because that's what we're here to do. We're here to educate the public about addiction and suicide, which again are closely related. And we talked a lot about the stigma associated with this. And we want to work to end the stigma associated with the discussion of suicide or any other type of addiction, and offer any help that we can that are suffering from these issues. So once again, guys, you can reach out to me as well. We have a Facebook site for Recovery is Possible. And my website is vanmeterwellnesssolutions.com. I think I'm in competition with you for complicated, long website addresses, but it is what it is. vanmeterwellnesssolutions.com. And Mark Pfetzer. Again, thanks you for coming and joining us. So,
thank you. I appreciate the support.
All right, man. Have a good night. And we are out.